Welcome back. Today's explainer is an absolutely fascinating journey. We are tracing this incredibly unique cultural arc, starting right in the neon-soaked nostalgia of the 1980s Canadian music scene and taking it all the way to the dramatic, structural crash of the whole industry in the early 2000s. Okay, let's dive into this. So, our story actually begins not in some dusty textbook or corporate boardroom, but with this highly relatable hook on a recent Reddit thread. An American user posted a simple, really honest question. Were catchy but kind of forgotten 80s Canadian bands like Chalk Circle actually big? Were they selling out massive arenas up in Canada back in the day, or were they mostly just playing small local clubs? Well, it turns out the modern internet has this sudden, super passionate fascination with rediscovering these forgotten groups. That one simple question sparked an absolute barrage of nostalgia. The original poster was genuinely shocked when literally hundreds of passionate responses just flooded in. People were eagerly dropping massive lists of band recommendations, which totally proves that the legacy of these artists is still fiercely defended by fans today. So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, discovering 80s Canadian bands. Second, riding the new wave. Third, the video star era. And finally, an industry in crisis. Section 1. Discovering 80s Canadian bands. Let's move to and see how this builds. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer depth of Canada's musical bench. Redditors offered up an absolute avalanche of talent to our curious American friend. We aren't just talking about a couple of one-hit wonders here. I mean, users were throwing out names like Chalk Circle, Sloan, Trooper, Men Without Hats, The Tragically Hip, Martha and the Muffins, and The Spoons. It really demonstrates the massive volume of homegrown talent that was absolutely dominating Canadian airwaves and creating a deeply rooted local music culture. Section 2. Riding the new wave. Now, to really understand this intense fandom, we have to look at the music itself. What made these groups so distinctly unique compared to their peers? Well, drawing from the synth and swagger archives, we can define Canadian new wave as a genre marked by angular guitars, icy synths, and some really sly social commentary. Bands from Toronto's edgy art school scene all the way to Montreal's quick-witted synth-pop circles crafted this incredibly signature, stylish sound. It was sharp, it was inventive, and honestly, it held its own against the global heavyweights from the US and the UK. A massive hallmark of this era was the clever songwriting. Take the Spoons, for instance, in their super catchy hit Romantic Traffic. They use this brilliant wordplay equating the sudden changing of traffic lights to the feeling of being completely blindsided by a fading romance. It wasn't just highly danceable pop music, It had a ton of lyrical depth and polish that really resonated with listeners. These bands were also pushing socio-political messaging right into the mainstream. For example, Martha and the Muffins released a track in 1984 called Black Stations/White Stations. And this song directly called out the music industry's practice of segregating black and white music on the radio. So the crucial point is that this Canadian new wave sound wasn't afraid to tackle serious systemic issues impartially, essentially asking radio stations to literally break down the doors of segregation. Section 3. The video star era. Right, so let's pivot from the actual sound of these bands to the visual medium that absolutely exploded this music onto the national stage. Let's track this cultural explosion, okay? In 1983, a Montrealer named Corey Hart released his debut album to a somewhat tepid initial response. But look at 1984. That's the pivotal year. MuchMusic, Canada's own music video network, launched. Suddenly, pouty, spiked-haired artists like Hart were being beamed directly into living rooms across the nation. The Canadian music video star was officially born, cementing this era where visual stardom drove unprecedented fandom and record sales. Section 4. An industry in crisis. I do have to warn you, the tone definitely shifts here. This incredible artistic boom was about to collide with a very cold macroeconomic reality in the early 2000s. Academic Will Straw draws on French economist Jacques Attali, who theorized that music acts as an early warning system for society. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the disruptions in how we consume music often predict imminent structural shifts in our broader economy. It gives us a glimpse into how labor and creativity will be organized in society as a whole. And in Canada, those warning bells were ringing loudly. Just juxtapose the screaming fans and vibrant creativity of the 80s with this stark reality. Over the course of a single year in 2001, the collapse was incredibly rapid. In March, Canada's last industry trade magazine, The Record, went completely out of business. Then, in May, the Song Corporation filed for bankruptcy, taking the legendary Attic Records down with it. And by November, the iconic retail chain Sam the Record Man was bankrupt too. These foundational pillars of the Canadian music ecosystem were just collapsing in rapid succession.
The data really tells the underlying story of this decline. Compilation albums like Much Dance surged to account for 16% of all music sales in Canada, which was a much higher rate than in the US, by the way. Think of this like the early 2000s version of a Spotify playlist. It provided really quick retail revenue, but it totally masked long-term structural problems. Fans were basically buying instant gratification hits, and that cannibalized the traditional, highly profitable full album sales that record labels entirely relied on to develop new artists.
The end result was a dramatic hollowing out of the industry. As traditional corporate models failed to adapt to technological changes and shifting consumer tastes, a staggering 80 to 90% of sound recording firms were reduced to what governments classify as micro-businesses. To put that into perspective, that means they employed 9 people or less. The era of massive centralized record labels building national stars had basically fractured into thousands of tiny, decentralized artisanal operations. So we've seen how quickly a booming cultural golden age can be dismantled by macroeconomic forces and technological shifts. But, as we reflect on the incredible legacy of these forgotten 80s bands that are still lighting up Reddit threads today, it really brings to mind the lyrics of the Spoons' hit Nova Heart. They sang about how humanity will never lose its creative spirit, comparing it to a nova that doesn't burn out. So I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder. As the traditional music industry fades and fractures into micro-businesses, will the creative spirit of the Nova Heart ever truly burn out, or will it just find a new way to shine? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparked your curiosity to go explore more of this incredible music history.